Okay, our last topic in this course is neural networks, and we will see how nicely it builds on the two previous topics. It really is founded on the idea of regression. The outline is similar to what we've seen in our previous two topics. First, we talk about model representation. Then we talk about how the neural network algorithm works. And then we talk about issues involved in using the neural network method. So when we talk about neural network model representation, first we'll talk about the brain and neurons. This is the inspiration for neural networks. Then we'll go from here to mathematical representation, model representation. And we'll show how this model can auto-model complex features. We've seen complex features before. We've taken some features and squared them and combined them algebraically. And neural networks do this automatically. So then we introduce the notation. This is important because it's a much more complicated model, so you need a nice way to represent it. Forward propagation illustrates how it works, deciphering neural networks, and multi-class classification with neural networks. Logistic regression was good for 2 classes, and to do more than 2 classes was somewhat involved, either one versus many or one versus one. But neural networks can do multi-class classification in one shot. So that's a very nice feature of neural networks. Let's begin with the brain and neurons. At one time it was believed that the brain had different types of components for its different functions, because we have different senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, running, thinking, etc. These are all quite different functions. So one would think that they require quite different components. However, now we believe and have good evidence that the brain consists of a huge amount of only one type of thing, the neuron. The neuron is the basis for all of these functions. Neurons are capable of learning a variety of things. They're very error tolerant and very flexible. So what do we mean by error tolerant? Well, suppose you have a picture and there's a smudge on the picture. Something like this. Now, your visual system is still capable of recognizing that this is a face with some smudges. Even though there's some distortion of the picture, your visual system is capable of performing this recognition task. So, neural networks are very error tolerant, very flexible. The same neurons can be used for many different tasks. This is really the key to deep learning, that neural networks can be used for all different kinds of data. They're extremely flexible. And the neurons in your brain are similarly flexible. For example, here is an apparatus that could be used by blind people to see. It takes signals from a camera and it converts them to signals on the tongue. Now, if you wore this device for a long time and trained yourself to recognize different things, the tongue system, this gives electrical impulses, so your tongue would feel electrical impulses. The tongue in time would be able to recognize objects and motion and so on. And it would become quite natural. You wouldn't even be thinking anymore that you are sensing something with your tongue. You are simply seeing using the tongue's neurons. Another example is that converts visual signals to another type of signal is this apparatus that converts visual signals to vibration on the forehead. And this device can be used to identify the presence of objects and their motion. For example, if there's a table in the visual field that's stationary and far away, it's indicated by a single blinking light in the direction of the table. As the table moves, you can see that we get alternating blinking lights as the table moves, and now the table is stationary, indicated by a blinking light in the direction of the table. As the table moves back, we get again the alternating blinking and the stable response. Now, all right, so here we go. So now, suppose we add a second object, then we have two separate blinks. And then they move at the same time. Now the object is closer. This is indicated by a different code. If the chair here is dangerously close, then it's indicated by this flashing double signal. Now, over time, if you use this device, it would become very natural, and you would simply associate these signals on your forehead with the location and motion of objects. So we mentioned the flexibility of neurons. Neurons are amazingly flexible and can be reused for different tasks. Pigeons can be used to classify paintings. Van Gogh and Chagall are two different painters with fairly similar styles. This is a Chagall painting. This is a Van Gogh painting. The pigeon can be trained using many examples of Chagall and Van Gogh paintings to distinguish between the two types of painters. Perhaps the pigeon is given one kind of response for recognizing correctly and one kind of response for recognizing incorrectly. Typically, you'll train pigeons by rewarding them with food when they make a correct guess. And the pigeon would express its guess by pecking on a dot or something like this. Now, it turns out that if you train a pigeon on a particular set of paintings, after some time, it can become 95% accurate to correctly identify the painting that it's seen before. So it remembers. But then if you show it some new paintings that it's never seen before, it's still quite accurate. Somehow the pigeon has learned to recognize patterns and features. So if a pigeon can do this, there is some hope that an automatic machine can do the same thing. Now, the pigeon is not using rules and making decisions. The pigeon is simply looking at the painting and deciding. If you ask the pigeon how it knew it was a Chagall or a Van Gogh painting, the pigeon wouldn't be able to tell you. This is one of the areas of research in neural networks. Neural networks are able to classify, but it's difficult to see or understand what basis for the classification. So a neural network in some sense is like a black box. It works, but it's difficult to see what it's actually doing. It's all under the hood. Now here's another example of the flexibility of neurons. Tadpoles are one stage in the life cycle of a frog before it becomes mature. Now the eye from a mature frog was surgically implanted in this tadpole, and the eye somehow connected itself to the nervous system of the tadpole, and the tadpole was able to learn how to use this eye to sense objects, possibly to sense motion or the presence of objects. So, we see again an example of the flexibility of neurons. Now here's an example of flexibility of neurons within the human brain. Neuroplasticity. Sometimes people's brains get damaged through accidents, perhaps during war. So in some cases, when about half of the brain is destroyed, the brain of these people rewired itself to use the existing neurons to give them 100% of function back. With somatosensory experiments, several experiments carried out to connect different sensor types of animals to other specialized parts of the brain. You can connect the eyes to the part of the brain that deals with hearing, and the brain component learned to use the sensor fully. So the animal whose eye was connected to the auditory cortex was able to see with its hearing system. Here is neuron structure. So neurons are extremely tiny, and they're highly interconnected. You can see this. This is the body of the neuron. Here's the nucleus. And then you have this axon, and you have these dendrites that connect this neuron to other neurons. So you see this basic structure of one neuron connecting to many. And we'll see that in human constructed neural networks. All right, so that's the motivation for neural networks. Next video will cover model representation.